Hi there. I recently bought the S100 bundle from the Cherry Audio store. Um, this bundle is based on the Behringer System 100 modulars, which in turn is based on the Roland System 100M modular system. I was messing about with it, and the VCF gives a very strange response. I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's just very different from any filter that I've come across before. So that prompted me to set up this experiment here. I'll just explain what we've got on screen. We've got a VCO over here, which is just generating a 32-foot wave, sawtooth and square wave, and I've set up an input selector switch here. So on button 1 you've got the sawtooth wave, on button 2 you've got the square or pulse wave, on 3 you've got the sawtooth wave plus a DC offset coming from up here. Button 4 gives you the pulse wave, and again you've got a variable DC offset that you can add to the pulse wave. And button 5 is just purely a DC signal, no AC signal at all. The output from that goes into this attenuator here, and that in turn is distributed to all these different filter models. So we've got 6 filters here. Number 1 is the Cherry Audio stock filter that comes with all versions of Voltage Modular from nucleus through to core. You've got the ladder filter, which again is Cherry Audio. You've got the laboratory VCF, which comes from MRB. This is a very nice filter indeed. It has a slightly different response from the others, but we'll see that later. Filter 4 is the Filtamp module 1006 from the VM2500 range, which is based on the ARP2500 modular system. Filter 5 is the 904A, which is from the VM900 collection, based on the Moog 900 series of modulars. And for number 6 we've got the S100, which is the one that we're really interested in. The outputs from all the filters are fed to this output selector switch here. So 1 goes to filter 1, 2 to filter 2, and so on. On filter 2 I've put it through an attenuator because the output of the ladder filter is quite a bit higher. I take it there's some kind of non-linearity going on there. So I fed it through an attenuator before sending it to output 2. Output 3 is from the MRB laboratory one, output 4 the ARP, 5 the Moog, and 6 for the S100. And the output from here is fed to 2 signals. One is the scope output, which is amplified by this channel and sent to input B. So you can see that we've got the sawtooth wave from the oscillator driving input A, and input B is coming from the output of the Cherry Audio stock filter, but going through this amplifier here. So if I just reduce the range here, you can see that the filtered sawtooth is dropping in amplitude. So we'll just match them up again. And down in this corner we've got the multi-oscilloscope, which is giving you simultaneous outputs of all the filters. So again, they're just in the order that you see them on the screen: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've set up this VCF filter cutoff frequency knob, which is driving the 1 volts per octave inputs to all of the filters, so that you can see simultaneously what happens when you change the cutoff frequency. And also on the output of this switch, you've got an attenuator which is feeding to the outside world. So bring that up, you start to hear the output of it. So I think what I'll do initially is just show you what all the filters look like in their wide open state. So we've got the filter frequency open as much as possible, and you can see that most of them look quite similar. There are slight non-linearities in the Cherry Audio ladder filter, in the ARP 1006. There's quite severe non-linearities in the 904, and you can see a slight bend in the S100 filter. I've reduced the amplitude of the oscillator input, so it's currently sitting at about 33%. If I up the amplitude here, you'll see that the non-linearities become more pronounced. So you can see that the ARP one has definitely got a bend. It's sort of asymmetric. Up here it's quite straight like a normal sawtooth, but then it starts to bend off in the negative half of the cycle. The 904 is starting to show real saturation quite early on. I mean, that's about 2.5 volts, and if I reduce the scale on it here and bump up the input amplitude, you can see that it gets very squashed. It's a symmetrical type of distortion, but it's very pronounced, quite a bit more saturated than all of the others. And an interesting thing to note about the 904 is that if you put a DC offset into the sawtooth, the distortion becomes asymmetric as the input DC offset goes positive or negative. So it really gets clamped very severely to about plus or minus 5 volts. An interesting thing to watch is that the ARP one and the S100 one don't seem to be affected by a DC offset, which suggests that there's some kind of high pass filter which is doing AC coupling on the input to these filters. The ARP is showing some distortion at the extremes, but generally speaking it does seem to centre itself around 0 volts. The S100 seems absolutely unaffected by whatever DC offset you put into the input, which suggests that it's just absolutely AC coupled, and there's some kind of high pass filter. Doesn't have to be a particularly steep slope on it, but it's just taken away the DC input completely. So I'll return the amplitude back down to about 33%, so that we're seeing similar sort of behaviour, and I'll just change the appearance of them on this screen so that they all kind of match up. I think that's reasonably fair. So what I'll do is I'll switch the output to each filter in turn and let you hear what they sound like, and I'll run them through the different cutoff frequencies from wide open to basically right down to a sine wave. So that's filter 1, which is the Cherry Audio stock filter. And as you can see, as we pull the cutoff frequency down, the wave just becomes smoother at the edges until it becomes effectively just a plain old sine wave. And if we switch to the Cherry Audio ladder filter, it goes through the same process. See, it's a very similar sort of response. And if we go to the MRB, no surprises, all very similar. They are very similar again. 904, and you can see that the output's a bit hefty there, so I'll just take down the scope range here and reduce the volume a bit. But again, it's just the same response as before, just reduces down to a sine wave at the bottom and gets progressively towards a sawtooth. You can see that there's a bit of a bend still on the output wave here, which is due to the non-linearities, even when we've got the input down at 33%. So with the input at an attenuation of about 25%, it starts to get quite linear. And as we go more towards 33% again, you start to see that bend, that symmetrical bend, is reintroduced. Now, if we switch to the S100, put the scope range up, you can see there's quite a pronounced bend on the waveform there. And that's with the filter wide open. And if we bring the cutoff frequency down, if you just have a look at the waveform here and up here, you'll see that the wave shape is quite different to all the others. Particularly if you look here, there's definite sort of giveaway of some kind of resonance happening there, even when the resonance control is down at 0. So if we introduce more resonance, it gets quite extreme quite quickly. And the interesting thing is that the resonant frequency that gets introduced when you bump up the resonance control doesn't seem to be related to the resonant frequency with resonance down at 0. So if you just look at this peak here, it's definitely a different frequency from when you increase the resonance. So there must be something inside the circuit model which resonance to happen all the time. So another thing to look at is if we put, instead of having the sawtooth wave going through it, if we look at the square wave, again we can see this telltale sign of there being some kind of AC coupling or high pass filter going on before the circuit in the ARP one and in the S100. And again, if we add a DC offset pulse wave, you can see that all the other filters are affected by the DC offset, whereas the ARP and the S100 are completely unaffected. Though as you get to extreme voltages, the ARP does seem to go into some kind of saturation at the extremes, but the S100 just remains unaffected. So we go back to sawtooth wave and we just have a look at what happens when you increase the resonance on the other filters. So we switch back to the stock Cherry Audio one. If we increase the resonance, so you get a marked reduction in the amplitude as you increase the resonance, which is quite common. So I'll just increase it at the scope here and then bring the frequency down. You can see that it's starting to generate the telltale ripples in the output. So if I start introducing that with the other filters, bring in the ladder filter and increase the emphasis here. Now there might be slight differences in the cutoff frequency. I just calibrated it by ear and by sight before doing the experiment, but you can see that there's a pretty close match between the two here. If I increase the resonance on the MRB laboratory, we see something quite different. Now the lab filter is very good at retaining the bass frequencies even when you increase the resonance. So the resonance comes in over the top while still retaining the body of the signal, which is quite unusual in a low pass filter, and it's a very handy thing to have, especially unsurprisingly for bass sounds. So that's quite a different response from all the others. Bring in resonance on the ARP, and the reason for all of these moving is because I'm actually triggering off the ARP. So I think I'll change the trigger channel to 3 here. And I'll just bring down the resonance a touch. Yep. So if we go back to the ARP filter and increase the resonance here, you can see that it's very, very similar to the other two above, but not the MRB one. Same with the Moog 904, increase the resonance or regeneration as I like to call it. And again, very, very similar waveform coming out there. And if we then come to the S100, does seem to be reasonably similar to the others. If I do a filter sweep now at that resonance setting, we'll see what happens. That's actually pretty close to all the others. So yeah, hope you found that interesting. I actually like having a sort of quirky filter design, so I'm quite glad I bought the S100 bundle. It doesn't react as you'd expect it to, but it's nice to have something a bit quirky in your rack that you can bring in whenever you want something a bit more extreme. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch up with you at some point.